The courtroom was wrapped in silence, the kind that presses down on every chest and sharpens every breath. The gavel had struck moments before, echoing like thunder in the still air, and now the room seemed to hold itself in place. Every eye was fixed on the center of power, Judge Judy herself, her gaze steady, her posture unshaken, her authority unquestionable. For a moment it felt as though order reigned, and then, without warning, the silence shattered. The lawyer leaned forward, his voice slicing through the air with a sneer that dripped with contempt. "This court," he said loudly enough for the gallery to hear, "is a joke." Gasps shot through the room, sharp and immediate, as though the words themselves had torn at the fabric of justice. The jurors stiffened, the gallery whispered in disbelief, and even the clerk's pen halted mid-stroke. No one in that room could remember the last time anyone had dared speak to her like that. In Judge Judy's courtroom, respect wasn't requested, it was demanded. The lawyer sat back with a smirk, satisfied with the chaos he had stirred. His arrogance filled the chamber, his eyes glancing around as though daring anyone to challenge him. For an instant, it seemed as if the weight of his words might linger unchecked. The silence returned, but this time it was heavier, darker, poisoned by disrespect. All eyes turned to Judy. The question hovered, unspoken but pulsing. How would she respond? Her gaze, sharp as steel, never wavered. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She didn't rise or pound the gavel again. She simply let the moment hang, stretching it until even the lawyer's smug grin began to falter. In that pause, in that controlled restraint, the tension became unbearable. The gallery leaned forward, breaths caught in anticipation. The courtroom had transformed into an arena, and everyone knew a reckoning was coming. Judy's lips parted, her eyes narrowing, as if measuring the weight of every syllable she was about to unleash. Because what she was about to say would not only silence the insult, it would turn the insult back on the one who delivered it. But what Judy said next left the entire courtroom stunned. The insult still echoed in the chamber, but beneath that single line was a deeper storm waiting to be unleashed. This was no ordinary case, no routine squabble over small claims or petty disputes. The matter before Judge Judy carried the kind of weight that drew every ear closer, the kind of case where every ruling would ripple outward, setting precedent in the minds of millions, who looked to her as a symbol of order and chaos. It had begun with what seemed like a straightforward dispute. An immigrant family seeking redress after being exploited by a landlord, who thought their vulnerability could be turned into profit. To them, this courtroom was not just four walls and a bench. It was a chance to be heard, to be respected, to prove that justice still had a place for those who often lived on its margins. They sat quietly in the gallery now, their faces etched with both fear and hope, watching the drama unfold. For the lawyer to sneer and declare, "This court is a joke," and was not merely an affront to Judy's authority. It was an insult aimed at the very idea that the powerless could stand before the powerful and expect fairness. His contempt wasn't just for the judge, it was for the people who depended on her judgment to carry meaning. Every immigrant, every worker, every citizen who had been dismissed or told their story, didn't matter, could feel the sting of his words. And that is why the tension in the room ran so deep. The lawyer wasn't mocking Judy alone. He was mocking the possibility that truth could win against arrogance. He wanted the gallery to believe that courts were theater, that justice was a game, that the voices of the vulnerable could be laughed out of existence. But Judy knew better. She had seen too many of these moments in her decades on the bench. She had witnessed arrogance burn bright and then crumble under the weight of its own hubris. She understood that in this moment, she wasn't just defending her courtroom. She was defending the principle that justice itself was no joke. The room waited. Every second seemed to lengthen as the insult hung in the air. Social media would soon light up with clips. Headlines would write themselves, but inside these walls, it was still only a battle of silence, stares, and suppressed gasps. And yet the stakes were far higher than anyone first realized. because Judy's reply would not only determine the course of this single case, it would send a message to every courtroom across America, to every lawyer who thought they could sneer their way through justice, to every individual who believed power could mock truth and win. Her words would echo like a gavel strike far beyond this chamber. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something larger than a reprimand. They were about to hear a declaration that would remind the nation why respect for the court wasn't about one judge, it was about the people, the process, the promise of fairness itself. And when Judy finally spoke, the air itself seemed to tighten, as though the walls leaned in to catch her words. What came next would cut deeper than the insult itself. Long before the words, "This court is a joke," left his lips, the lawyer had already built a reputation that whispered through courthouse corridors like an open secret. His name carried weight in certain circles, but not for brilliance or integrity. No, his reputation was carved from arrogance, sharpened by entitlement, and polished by a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face. He was the kind of lawyer who relished the performance more than the principle, the showmanship more than the substance. Where others studied case law late into the night, he boasted about winning cases through intimidation, loopholes, or sheer audacity. To him, the courtroom was never about truth. It was about winning, about bending perception until justice itself became unrecognizable. Colleagues who once tried to reason with him had long since stopped. They knew his game too well. He was the one who mocked judges behind closed doors, laughing about their theatrics while ignoring his own. He was the one who saw vulnerable clients not as people in need, but as pawns in a larger spectacle he was staging for his own ego. To every warning about ethics or responsibility, he responded with the same scoff. It's not about right or wrong, it's about who plays the game better. That philosophy had earned him short-term victories, yes, but it had also left scars. Former clients whispered about deals gone sour, about promises broken when his attention drifted toward the next flashy case. He was known for walking into courtrooms with an air of untouchability, as though the law itself bent at his convenience. And while some admired his boldness, most saw him for what he truly was, careless, smug, and dismissive of the very justice he was sworn to uphold. The contradictions in his character were glaring. He wore the title of officer of the court, but treated the court with disdain. He spoke about defending clients' rights, but often treated those same clients as disposable. He carried himself as if he were a champion of freedom, yet he belittled the very institutions that safeguarded it. He called himself a servant of justice, yet mocked justice in the same breath. And now, standing in Judge Judy's courtroom, those contradictions were sharper than ever. To him, mocking her authority was just another performance, another opportunity to grandstand, to flex his defiance in front of a crowd. But what he failed to grasp was that this stage was unlike any other. This wasn't some corner courtroom where arrogance went unchecked. This was Judy's arena, a place where sharp tongues met sharper minds, and where disrespect was met not with silence, but with precision. The gallery could feel it. They had seen his type before, lawyers who mistake volume for substance, who mistake insults for arguments. But this moment felt different, heavier, because the stakes weren't just about one case. This was about whether arrogance could stand, unchallenged in the very space, meant to keep arrogance in check. His past made the scene almost inevitable. Every boast, every smirk, every cheap victory had brought him here, to this very second where his words would test the limits of patience and respect. And now, with the insult still lingering in the air, he sat there smugly, unaware that his downfall had already begun the moment he underestimated the woman in front of him. Because Judge Judy was no tempty, just another name on his list of judges to needle or mock. She had built her reputation on cutting, through arrogance, with razor-sharp clarity. She had dismantled men twice his size, lawyers twice his skill, egos twice his volume. She had seen the pattern 100 times before, and she knew exactly how it ended. The gallery leaned in, sensing that history was about to repeat itself. That once again, arrogance would meet its match. The lawyer believed he had rattled the court. In reality, all he had done was set the stage for his own undoing. And as Judy Tam's gaze fixed on him, steady and unyielding, the truth became clear: his smirk would not last. What she was about to deliver would strip away every layer of entitlement. He had wrapped himself in and the courtroom would never forget it. Long before this case and long before the insult that dared to shatter her courtroom, Judge Judy had carved her place in the American conscience. She was not born into power, nor did she inherit her authority from anyone else. She built it moment by moment, ruling by ruling, case by case. Her legacy was the product of grit, razor-sharp wit, and a commitment to fairness so unflinching it often startled those who thought they could bend her. She began her career in the gritty trenches of family court, where the stakes were not millions of dollars or corporate contracts, but people out TM's lives, futures, and dignity. In those years, she developed the discipline that would later define her, the ability to cut through noise, to refuse excuses, to strip away the theatrics and expose the truth. Day after day, she listened to stories of broken promises, fractured families, and raw injustice. And day after day, she reminded those before her that respect was the first and most important rule of justice. One of the earliest stories that cemented her reputation came from a custody hearing where tempers ran hot. A father, consumed by his own bitterness, began shouting over his ex-wife, belittling her in front of the court. The gallery expected Judy to gavel the chaos into silence. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low but sharp as glass. This is not your stage, she said. You are not here to perform. You are here to be accountable. If you cannot attempt to show respect for her, you will show respect for this court. The father froze, silenced not by volume but by authority. That was Judy Teme's gift, not to shout louder but to strike deeper. Years later, in a fraud case that drew national attention, she confronted a slick-talking defendant who tried to dodge responsibility with charm and jokes. The man smirked as if the court existed for his amusement. Judy, unflinching, dismantled his testimony line by line until the smirk vanished. When he muttered, "This is ridiculous," she met his eyes and delivered a line still replayed on television reruns. "What's ridiculous is thinking you can come here and make a mockery of the truth. Not in my courtroom. Not ever." These moments were not anomalies. They were the through line of her career. Time and again, people underestimated her. They saw a woman in a robe and mistook firmness for fragility, calm for weakness. They mistook fairness for softness, respect for leniency. Each time, they discovered just how wrong they were. Judy was a storm wrapped in composure, a reminder that dignity could be as fierce as any weapon. Her sharp wit became legend. She didn't just shut down disrespect. She did it with words that cut so cleanly they left audiences gasping. She turned arrogance into its own undoing, mocking into its own humiliation. Viewers didn't just admire her rulings, they admired the way she stood her ground, embodying the values that so many wished they could summon in their own lives. But beneath the wit and fire was a deeper principle. Judy was disciplined not because she loved control, but because she understood what chaos did to people, especially to those without power. She knew that when a courtroom descended into mockery, the first voices silenced were always those of the vulnerable, and so she protected that space fiercely, guarding it as a sanctuary where even the least powerful could expect dignity. Now, in this case, that legacy pressed against the silence. The immigrant family seated quietly in the gallery, clutching their hope, wasn't just waiting for a ruling. They were waiting for Judy to be the Judy they had seen for decades, unshaken, unflinching, unwilling to let arrogance crush the weak. The lawyer thought his words were clever, that he had shifted the atmosphere in his favor. But those who knew her history understood he had only lit the fuse. For Judy had always thrived when underestimated. Each time someone thought her age, her gender, or her demeanor could be exploited, she turned the tables. Each time someone believed they could use her courtroom as a stage for themselves, she reminded them whose stage it really was. That was why the gallery leaned forward now, their anticipation electric. They knew they were about to witness the next chapter in a long legacy of put-downs, of comebacks, of moments when Judy turned arrogance into ash. The lawyer believed he had the upper hand. What he didn't realize was that he had walked into the one courtroom in America where mockery was fuel, not fire. He had underestimated the wrong judge. And as Judy's eyes locked on him, history itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for the inevitable. Because in Judy's courtroom, There is only one truth. You can laugh at justice if you want, but justice will always have the last word. The insult had already poisoned the air, but the lawyer wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his lips as if daring Judy to challenge him. The silence she allowed after his outburst seemed to embolden him further. He mistook her restraint for weakness, her patience for hesitation. And so, like a man unaware of the cliff's edge beneath his feet, he stepped forward again. "Honestly, Judge," he said with a laugh that grated like metal on stone, "I don't even know why we're wasting time here. This case doesn't deserve a courtroom. It deserves a trash can." Gasps rippled across the gallery. The immigrant family at the center of the dispute lowered their eyes, shame pressing down on them as though his words had stripped them of dignity. The gallery began to stir, whispers darting back and forth, outrage rising like heat in the room. Yet Judy remained still. Her gaze stayed locked, her expression unreadable, as though every word he uttered was being etched into stone for later reckoning. The lawyer didn't notice the shift in the gallery's mood. He didn't hear the way the whispers carried his arrogance like wildfire, fueling anticipation of the explosion everyone knew was coming. Instead, he plowed ahead, arrogance thick in his voice. "Your Honor, if you ask me, this whole setup is nothing but theatrics. People come in here with sob stories expecting miracles, and the court eats it up. It's pathetic." Now the tension in the room was unbearable. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Even the bailiff's jaw clenched, his posture tightening as though bracing for impact. The gallery leaned in, unable to look away. It wasn't just disrespect anymore, it was desecration. A direct assault on the sacredness of justice itself. And still Judy did not speak. She sat motionless, her silence louder than his words, letting him dig deeper, letting him reveal himself in full. Her eyes, sharp and steady, never wavered. She had mastered the art of waiting, of letting arrogance swell until it could only collapse under its own weight. The lawyer misread the moment again. He leaned forward now, his voice dropping into a condescending drawl. "You see, Judge, the problem with courts like this is simple. They give too much respect to people who don't deserve it. And frankly, this whole charade makes a mockery of real justice." The room held its breath. It was as if every heartbeat had slowed, waiting for the inevitable. The immigrant mother in the gallery clutched her child's hand tighter, her eyes darting from the lawyer's sneer to Judy's still face. Then came the whispers again, hushed but frantic, sweeping through the room. When will she strike? What will she say? How much more can she take? Every second dragged like an eternity. The atmosphere was thick, charged, as though lightning hovered just above the judge's bench. The lawyer, blind to the storm building around him, smiled smugly, convinced he had claimed the stage. And that was when Judy moved. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, it was deliberate. She straightened in her chair, her hands resting firmly on the bench, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a hawk locking on its prey. The murmurs died instantly. The gavel had not yet fallen, but its echo seemed to already fill the room. The lawyer faltered for the first time, his grin flickering as silence pressed back against him. The air itself felt different now, thicker, heavier, as if the weight of decades of Judy's authority had descended in a single breath. The gallery leaned forward, their anticipation reaching fever pitch. They knew the moment had arrived, the turning point where composure transforms into fire. Judy had given him rope, and now she would decide how to pull it tight. The lawyer opened his mouth again, but no sound came. For the first time since his outburst, he seemed to sense that the stage was no longer his, because Judy had decided it was time to strike. The silence was suffocating. The lawyer sat there, still trying to steady his smirk. But the weight in the room had shifted entirely. It was no longer his stage, no longer his performance. Every eye in the chamber was locked on Judge Judy, waiting for the inevitable. She let the silence stretch just long enough for arrogance to curdle into doubt, just long enough for the gallery's anticipation to reach the point of breaking. Then she leaned forward ever so slightly, her voice low, precise, and lethal. "The only joke here," she said, pausing to let the words slice through the air, "is your argument." It landed like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted in a wave of muffled gasps and sharp whispers. Even the stenographer's keys hesitated, as if the courtroom itself needed a moment to absorb the blow. The lawyer's grin faltered visibly, his lips twitching as though searching for a retort but finding none. Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her control was complete. And in that calm, deliberate tone, she began dismantling him piece by piece. "You've stood here," she continued, her eyes never leaving his, mocking not only this courtroom, but the very people who look to it for justice. And yet, when I strip away your sneers, your interruptions, your theatrics, what remains? Nothing, no evidence, no credibility, just noise. The lawyer shifted in his seat. The confidence that had once dripped from him, now replaced with the fidgeting of a man caught, naked in the spotlight. His hands, once casually folded, began tapping against the table. Judy caught it instantly. "Do you hear that?" she asked, tilting her head slightly toward the tapping. "That's the sound of desperation. And if you thought this court would bend to your arrogance, you've gravely miscalculated." The gallery stirred again, murmurs rippling like waves. Every word Judy spoke seemed to reverberate beyond the walls, as if each line was already destined to be replayed, quoted, turned into headlines and hashtags. Judy pressed forward. "You claim this case belongs in the trash can. I'll remind you that this family you've mocked came here because they believed in something greater than your cynicism. They believed in the law. They believed in fairness. And what did you offer in response? A sneer, a smirk, insults instead of arguments, arrogance instead of truth." Her eyes shifted briefly to the family seated quietly in the gallery, then back to the lawyer. "Your contempt doesn't diminish their dignity. It diminishes yours." The lawyer tried to interject, stammering, "Your Honor, with all due—" "No," Judy cut in sharply, her words slicing clean through his sentence. "You've had your time. Now it's mine." The interruption landed harder than any gavel strike. For once, the lawyer was the one silenced mid-thought, his jaw tightening as he leaned back, unable to regain control. Judy continued, her tone steady, deliberate. "For years I have listened to people like you mistake arrogance for intelligence. I have seen countless attorneys swagger into courtrooms, believing their attitude could outweigh their arguments. And do you know how every one of those stories ends? Exactly like this. With empty words, with clients left ashamed, with nothing but the echo of disrespect rattling in the air." The lawyer's face flushed red. He opened his mouth again but found himself lost, his usual arsenal of smirks and quips evaporating under Judy's relentless gaze. She leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You call this court a joke? Let me tell you what a joke truly is. A man with a license to practice law who confuses disrespect with strategy, who believes sneering at the weak makes him strong, and who thinks mocking the bench somehow hides the emptiness of his case. That, counselor, is the only joke in this room." The gallery broke into quiet but audible applause, quickly hushed by the bailiff. Yet the energy could not be contained. It was as if Judy's words had unleashed something deeper, validation for everyone who had ever been talked over, dismissed, or mocked by those who believed their arrogance made them untouchable. The lawyer's shoulders slumped slightly now, his earlier bravado collapsing under the weight of Judy's calm but devastating dismantling. He fumbled with his notes, flipping pages that contained nothing useful, his eyes darting toward the gallery as if searching for some invisible support. There was none. Judy pressed further, her voice firm, unwavering. "You came into this courtroom thinking it belonged to you. You forgot that it belongs to the people. It belongs to the ones who seek justice, not those who mock it. And while you've wasted time with insults, I've listened. I've seen through the bluster. And what I've seen is this: a lawyer who stands for nothing but himself." The words cut deeper than any rebuke he had ever faced. For the first time, the lawyer's eyes dropped, unable to meet hers. His hands fumbled again, but even the paper before him seemed to betray him. Nothing there to save him from the storm he had brought upon himself. Judy allowed the silence to stretch once more. The tension now reversed, pressing down on him, not her. She studied him for a moment, then delivered her final blow. "Consider this your lesson. Arrogance doesn't win cases. Evidence does. Respect does. Truth does. And in this courtroom, counselor, truth will always have the last word." The gallery erupted again, this time unable to restrain their reaction. The immigrant mother's eyes filled with tears, not from pity, but from relief. From the validation of watching someone powerful defend her dignity in a space where it could have been trampled. The lawyer sat defeated, his face drained of color, his smirk erased. His performance had collapsed, and in its place stood a reminder, crystal clear, that this courtroom was never his stage. It was hers. But even as the gavel struck, sealing the moment, the story was far from over. Because what had just happened inside those walls would not stay confined there. The echoes were already moving outward, toward cameras, headlines, and the court of public opinion. And what the world was about to witness would turn a single courtroom clash into something far larger. The gavel struck once, and the sound seemed to echo beyond the paneled walls of the courtroom. For a brief second, the room froze. Then came the murmurs, low at first, then swelling like waves crashing against the shore. The gallery couldn't contain itself. Some whispered in awe, some chuckled at the lawyer's visible collapse, and others simply sat back, satisfied they had just witnessed something unforgettable. Judge Judy didn't bask in the reaction. She sat with the same calm she had maintained throughout, as though nothing extraordinary had happened, but everyone else in the room knew better. What had just unfolded wasn't routine. Courtroom procedure. It was a cultural moment. The kind of exchange that would outgrow the trial itself and live in replay clips, memes, and headlines. Within minutes of adjournment, word began to spread. A few spectators who had managed to slip their phones out discreetly had captured snippets. A lawyer's smug insult, "This court is a joke," and Judy's thunderous counter, "The only joke here is your argument," was already circulating before anyone even left the courthouse parking lot. By nightfall, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram lit up like wildfire. The hashtags were instant and unstoppable. Judy strikes back, and court is no joke climbed to the top of trending lists. Clips of the exchange were posted with captions like, "This is why you never mess with Judge Judy," and "The clapback of the century." Memes appeared within hours. Judge Judy with sunglasses edited onto her face, the lawyer photoshopped shrinking into a chair, captions reading, "Sit down, counselor." But beyond the humor, something deeper began to take shape. Legal commentators seized the moment, analyzing it from every angle. Some marveled at Judy's ability to maintain composure in the face of blatant disrespect, calling it a masterclass in judicial authority. Others pointed out how she used logic, not volume, to dismantle arrogance. Proof? They argued that true power doesn't shout, it speaks with precision. CNN ran a segment titled, "When the Judge Judges Back," replaying the exchange frame by frame, while MSNBC hailed it as the return of courtroom dignity. Even late-night talk shows joined in, with hosts joking that the lawyer had aged 10 years in 10 seconds under Judy's glare. On Reddit, the debate raged in forums like r/Law and r/Public Freakout. Lawyers weighed in, calling Judy's takedown a textbook example of what happens when counsel mistakes theatrics for argument. Everyday users simply enjoyed the poetic justice of watching arrogance fall flat. One top comment read, "This wasn't just a ruling. This was a reminder to every loudmouth who thinks respect doesn't matter." For the family at the heart of the case, the aftermath was more personal. Interviews later revealed the immigrant mother felt seen and defended, not just in legal terms, but in human dignity. To her, Judy's words were more than a rebuke to a lawyer. They were a validation that her voice mattered in a system often tilted against the powerless. The cultural resonance only grew in the following days. Editorials appeared in newspapers, likening Judy's courtroom to a shrinking island of discipline in a world increasingly filled with noise and disrespect. Commentators noted how rare it was for a public figure to stand so firmly against arrogance without descending into theatrics herself. Judy became once again a symbol, not just of legal authority, but of no-nonsense justice, a figure unwilling to compromise dignity for spectacle. Schools of law even circulated the clip in lectures, framing it as a lesson in courtroom decorum, authority, and advocacy. One professor was quoted saying, "What you just watched is not television. That is the real art of controlling a courtroom." But it wasn't just academia or the legal community talking. Ordinary people, millions of them, were captivated. Tweets poured in, "Judge Judy for president. We need more Judy in politics, less of these clowns." She didn't just shut him down, she restored my faith in accountability. The lawyer, meanwhile, became an unwilling meme. His face, frozen mid-smirk, then mid-collapse, spread across the internet. Though his name was technically public record, he quickly became more of a symbol than a person, the embodiment of arrogance, undone by truth. Some called it unfair. Others argued it was the price of choosing mockery over professionalism. What stood out most in the ripple effect was how it transcended the courtroom. It wasn't just about Judy versus one lawyer anymore. It became a shorthand for something bigger. Respect versus arrogance, substance versus noise, truth versus theatrics. And in that cultural conversation, Judy's words weren't merely a witty comeback. They were a rallying cry. A week later, when the hashtag still hadn't died down, a popular op-ed in the New York Times summed it up best. The joke is over. Judge Judy reminded us that dignity in discourse isn't old-fashioned, it's essential. In a time when so many voices compete for attention by being the loudest, the nastiest, or the most outrageous, her calm precision was refreshing. It wasn't just the mic drop moment people loved. It was the fact that Judy didn't stoop to his level. She stayed exactly who she was, firm, fair, sharp, and unflinching. That's why the movement grew. Judy Strikes Back wasn't just a trend, it was a message. A reminder that arrogance can unravel in seconds when confronted with truth, delivered fearlessly. The courtroom lights may have dimmed that day, but the echoes carried on into homes, classrooms, news cycles, and hearts. Judy's takedown wasn't just a moment in court. It became a cultural milestone. A story retold not because of its theatrics, but because of its clarity. And for millions watching from afar, the message was simple. Disrespect may shout, but justice will always have the last word. The courtroom had quieted after the storm. The murmurs, the whispers, the shock, all of it had subsided into a stillness that carried more weight than noise ever could. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice calm but steady, her words carefully chosen. This was no longer about one lawyer's insult. It was about something bigger. Something that reached far beyond four walls and wooden benches. Respect for this court, she said, pausing long enough for the silence to deepen, is not about me. It is about the people we serve. That line shifted the entire atmosphere. It reframed everything. What had seemed like a personal clash between a smug attorney and a sharp-witted judge suddenly became a mirror, reflecting society itself. Judy was not defending her ego. She was defending the principle that justice, order, and fairness depend on respect. Without it, the system collapses into chaos. She went on, voice steady, deliberate. When you mock these proceedings, you don't insult me. You insult every person who comes here seeking fairness. You insult the idea that truth matters. You insult the families who put their faith in this institution to hear them, protect them, and deliver justice. The lesson was clear. A courtroom is not theater. It is not a stage for grandstanding. It is not a playground for egos. It is the place where dignity must outweigh arrogance, where truth must rise above noise, where order must defeat chaos. The lawyer's smirk had long faded. His arrogance, once unshakable, had melted under the weight of Judy's words. But more importantly, everyone watching, inside the room and beyond, felt the resonance of her message. She wasn't scolding one man. She was reminding an entire culture of something it had almost forgotten. Too often, in politics, media, even everyday arguments, the loudest voice is mistaken for the strongest. The harshest insult is mistaken for the sharpest wit. The boldest arrogance is mistaken for leadership. But Judy's response turned all of that upside down. Respect is not weakness. Calm is not passivity. Discipline is not silence. True authority, true strength lies in clarity and conviction. The moral of the moment spread not because of its drama, but because of its truth. Viewers who had grown weary of noise, chaos, and constant bickering found something restorative in Judy's words. They were a reminder that justice isn't just about verdicts, it's about values. In interviews afterward, commentators framed it perfectly. Judy had transformed an insult into a lesson. She took arrogance and converted it into clarity. What could have been remembered as a clash of egos became instead a reminder that institutions, whether courts, schools, or even families, depend on respect to function. Disrespect may be loud, Judy concluded, her voice measured, but truth stands taller, and in this courtroom, truth will always have the final word. Those final words hit like a gavel themselves. They left no room for argument, no space for rebuttal. The lawyer had been silenced, not by humiliation, but by undeniable principle. And the people watching, whether in the gallery or online, felt something unusual in today's world: moral satisfaction. Because in a society where arrogance too often drowns out dignity, Judy had reminded everyone of something timeless. Noise fades, but truth remains. Her legacy, built on decades of discipline, wit, and fairness, crystallized in that moment. She was not just a judge shutting down disrespect. She was a symbol of the order that makes justice possible. And that, in the end, was the real resolution, not the lawyer's defeat, not even the trending hashtags, but the truth Judy left behind. That respect is bigger than any one person. That dignity is stronger than arrogance. That truth is louder than noise. That order will always triumph over chaos. It was more than a courtroom lesson. It was a universal one. And for everyone who heard it, the message rang clear. Justice is no joke. And just like that, in one sharp, unforgettable line, Judge Judy silenced arrogance with wit that cut deeper than any insult. The only joke here is your argument. A courtroom that had seemed on the edge of chaos snapped back into order, not with volume but with clarity. It was more than a comeback. It was a reminder. Authority isn't about power. It's about responsibility. Responsibility to uphold fairness. Responsibility to demand respect. Responsibility to show that truth matters more than noise. That's why this moment resonated so strongly. It wasn't just a courtroom clapback, it was a cultural reset. For every viewer tired of arrogance winning airtime, for everyone who's seen noise drown out dignity, Judy's words were a breath of fresh air. She didn't just win an argument. She reminded us that principles will always stand taller than ego. And here's the takeaway for all of us. In a world overflowing with loudness, the voice of truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to stand firm. Judy did that, and the ripple effect proved just how powerful it can be when authority is rooted in respect, not arrogance. Now it's your turn. If you believe voices like Judge Judy's deserve to be amplified louder, if you believe truth should trend over chaos, join us. Subscribe to this channel, share this story with others, and let's build a community where respect, dignity, and justice aren't just ideals, they're the standard. Because when arrogance tries to take the stage, we need more moments where truth strikes back. And together we can make sure those moments are heard. Subscribe, share. Let's keep truth trending.